I'm very pleased to be here tonight in Brașov. Allow me to start my presentation tonight with a story. I was 14 years old, and all I was dreaming about was to become a vet, a medical doctor for cats, dogs, and animals. So I was dreaming to live at the countryside, to have a farm, to run with horses and cater for dogs and cows and all sorts of other animals. But as I was born in the city, in Bucharest of Ceausescu, and those of you who remember the time get a bit the picture, all I could get my hands on were little kittens and stray dogs that I would rescue every 2-3 weeks and bring home to the despair of my parents. My parents were both teachers. My mother was a high school teacher teaching history, and my dad was at the university at the chair of pedagogics. So, as I said, I was 14, and at a time, usually in any learning system, you have to make a decision. You have to choose the path you'll follow into your maturité or high school and later on in the university. Naturally, my parents, being both in the learning system, wanted me to follow the pedagogics high school, which was very conveniently situated an hour of a walk where we were living. Me, I wanted to become a vet, which at that time in Bucharest meant going to the a very far place, to the Băneasa school, which would have taken an hour and a half of trip every day. So I've put a big tantrum at home, the kind of crisis and screaming and shouting that only a teenager can do. And believe me, now, as a mother of two, I know what it means from the other side. So to cut the story short, I convinced my parents this is what I wanted to do. So they allowed me to register and go to the vet school, which I followed consciously for about 4 years, and then I failed gloriously at the university level. But my parents were there for me, and they allowed me to fail. At the time, the revolution came around, and those of you who were big enough at the time know that changed our life and opened all new opportunities. While I was in high school, my mother also insisted that I take French classes, which allowed me, a couple of years after I finished the high school, to start working with the Romanian Committee for UNICEF, the Global Fund for Children, the UN Global Fund for Children. And that opened completely new doors for me to what is called the international organizations, or the UN, where most of my career happened afterwards. I was then offered a position in Geneva, which I took, and then became the learning manager in one of the big organizations there, working with adults and with institutions. A couple of years later, when I became a trainer, I picked up the phone and I called my parents to thank them for insisting that I take pedagogic classes when I was 14. Because in the end, I was doing what they wanted me to do, to teach. But I was working with adults, as I said earlier, and I was looking into ways to making individual learning into organizational progression. So tonight, I'm not here to give you answers, but rather to invite you to join me in asking, is innovation possible in big organizations, in big administrations? And if so, what would be needed for that? So before we dive into the subject, I'd like to touch upon 3 of the concepts that, to my view, are related to the idea. So these are administrative structures, innovation, and courage. So when you think about administrative structures, you think of big institutions that employ at least 1,000 of employees, usually spread across some regional boundaries. Could they be at a local level, regional level, international level, who all cover the same tasks. Usually the same tasks that were done 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And the key word here is tasks, as opposed to processes. Moving on, innovation. Here, innovation is a process by which an idea or an invention is turned into a process or a product that will bring added value. For an innovation, according to the businessdictionary.com, if you look it up, for an idea or an invention to become innovation, it needs to be replicated. You need to be able to reproduce it. It's to be replicated at an economic cost and to answer a very specific need. Some of the most fertile fields where creativity and innovation spurs come from very rigid contexts, which put a lot of boundaries, procedural boundaries, behavioral boundaries, or ideological boundaries. So for innovation to happen, you need what I called the rule of 3I, the 3I rule innovation, which requires bold, determined use of information, imagination, and initiative. Without that, you cannot have innovation. And lastly, courage. Courage is a state of mind and body. It's the moral and mental strength to take action, to fight, to persevere, to venture, and to address difficulties, challenges, or danger. Courage is a decision. It's an act that you take willingly to do something, to act. And as such, it can be educated, stimulated, and eventually mastered. So you're thinking, why do we need innovation in big administrations, big institutions? They seem to be working for decades the way they are. Now, imagine a place where hiring, firing, and the way people are paid, remuneration, are very rigid, very well controlled, but where it doesn't really matter how you do your job. You don't know when your performance is good or is not rewarded if you perform well, or your mistakes are being punished without you knowing how you could improve them. In this place, reputation is built only through subjective feedback, if you're lucky to get it from your boss. And then only the bold and the reckless make it through the ranks and get promoted, usually after they took a leadership course, preferably abroad. So, at one point, I was the learning manager in this big organization, which was employing at that time 5,000 people spread across the globe, that grew very rapidly in a matter of years, 3-4 years, to 10,000 people. I had limited resources, far less than what my colleagues had in other organizations, but I had a very dynamic team and motivated to try new things. I also had access to very good directors and managers who were part of my board, who were managing the learning function, to whom I could turn for advice, guidance, and approval. And very importantly, I had a pretty comfortable room for maneuver in implementing the decisions we took. So all in all, things were working fine. I was having fun, my job was interesting, challenging, and entertaining. And yet, at one point, there was this slowing frustration growing slowly within me, nagging me more and more, and without me knowing exactly what it was. So, at that point, I realized I was discontent, I was not happy with the status quo. I didn't like the way things were. Because after realizing animals are really not my passion, I realized people are my passion. And I like to work with people, and I get satisfaction from their fulfillment. And what I was doing at the time was only part of the story, was covering only part of it. At that time, learning and development was really isolated, with no very clear beginning and no continuation. So I realized that as an institution, to make learning, individual learning, more valuable and advance together, we needed to integrate it within a broader context to make things more meaningful. We needed competencies to define the kind of behavior that needs to be rewarded. We needed to make sure that we have elements that would enable us to compare the performance between two people who are doing similar jobs, whether they were in Geneva, Bucharest, Jakarta, or Mogadishu. So, what did I do about it? As I said earlier, at that time, I was happily running the management function, and I received at one point some additional funds with the motivation that the number of staff grew, so therefore we needed to do more training, we needed to organize more courses. But that's when I decided that the additional funds will not be used for creating more learning. That was the rebellion moment that required courage. I went to my boss and I said, I don't want to do that, I want to do this. I want to create a new evaluation system that will build on discussions that took place in the organization years and years back, and they put it on our shelf and forgot about it. But I told my boss, this is what we need. At that time, I was one of the youngest managers, a woman, working in an organization that was very, very male-oriented and quite traditional in the way it distributed funds. The idea was to keep people around so that they can do more of what they were doing, rather than using the new money for new programs. So, all in all, the odds of me doing what I wanted to do were not very positive. And yet, I knew it needed to be done. And I was excited about it. So, what did I do? And here's the little model that I followed. It's based on courage, teamwork, and communication. Courage. Courage to analyze the situation from all the angles and realize what needs to be done and accept it. The first thing here is to acknowledge the fact that you cannot do things by yourself. If you do that and you think that you're Superman or Superwoman, you're not going to go too far. Then look around and see who are the decision makers around here. Chances are, even you're the big boss, you are not the only one. So go and talk to those people. These are the ones who have to become your allies. They are the ones you have to convince that your idea is worth pursuing. My piece of advice is to start from the bottom. Take a bottom-up approach. Go and speak to the people who are doing the day-to-day work. If you don't include them in the communication, if they don't know what are the benefits of your idea, you run the risk of falling flat at the implementation level. I started with my team, then I went to my boss, who then helped me create a committee. That's very good in international organizations and big administrations. Put up a committee to help you. They took on then the task of buying in other actors and decision makers that are very important for the success of your idea. That was the courage part. Team. One piece of advice. Lonely players are not particularly suited for big changes in administrations. So you need to make sure you have the team around. My team, as I said earlier, were very motivated and dynamic. Some of their skills were needed in the new project. I also needed new ones, but I also needed new competencies. So we had to hire the skills, the services of an external provider that will help us integrate at one point the new module that we're creating into the platform. So another thing that happens in the big administrations is that at one point somebody will recommend an expert that it's going to be very good for your team. And you know very well that you're going to have a very hard time in integrating them into your team. Resisting that suggestion is going to be a total waste of time and energy, which are extremely valuable for your project. So go with it, accept it, include the person or the persons, sometimes there are more people, into your team, and use what you get. Use everything you have, every competency, every skill for your project and your idea. You need them all on board. But you also need to spend time with your team, talking to everybody, making sure they understand and they like to work with each other, making them understand that it's vital to do so, otherwise the entire enterprise will fall. And then, lately, communicate. Therefore, I exist. So, with due credit to Descartes, I decided to use the same metaphor and paraphrase him. Without good communication, any idea, as brilliant and genial it can be, it will die without proper communication. And we're talking here about strategic communication, with the right messages, with the right audience, in the right quantity and frequency set at the right time. We spent in this project maybe half of the efforts and the energy in putting up a strong communication strategy that was based on complementary messages. Emails, nuggets of information that we delivered focus groups, a new intranet page dedicated only for the performance management system, you name it. Everything that needed to be done, it was done. So, all in all, it took us 2 years, but we managed to do it. It took a lot of effort, a lot of frustration, sometimes a couple of failures that almost killed the entire enterprise, but we made it. The new evaluation process system was launched in time, and now it benefits more than 6,000 people across the globe, and the data that we gathered serves in improving all other recruitment, talent management, and career mobility processes. So in the end, we did succeed. In the meantime, I left the organization. I'm no longer there, but I know the process is still ongoing, and the change it introduced triggered more changes in the way people are looking at their role in that big administration. So my name is Liliana Mircescu, and it was a pleasure to be with you tonight. Thank you for listening.